Hello, this short video shows you how to insert cotter pin joints into a soft toy. Cotter pin joints are used to articulate or move heads and arms and legs of bears, and this is the traditional way they were used when bears were first invented. Cotter pin joints come in different sizes, but most of them consist of 2 discs, 2 washers and a pin. And I'll show you how to insert them in a minute, but the washer and the disc go onto the pin and then they get inserted into the bear. Sometimes on much smaller bears you just have 2 fibreboard discs and a pin and no washers, but in the bear we're going to look at, they're like this. This is what a cotter pin joint looks like on the inside of the bear. You can see the disc and the washer and the pin curled round, and that's what makes it move. Before you start putting the cotter pin joints in your bear, it's important to know where you want them to be situated. You can do this either by marking the point where you want the joint with a little tailor tack or a little stitch, or equally you can do it by marking with a little cross on the inside of the fabric. First, I'm going to insert the cotter pin joint into one of the legs. You get the pin, you put a washer on top, and then you put a disc on top of that. Then you open up the fabric to find the marker for your cotter pin joint. There it is there. And you wiggle the joint through the fabric. Sometimes you might need to make a tiny hole with an awl or a tiny tip of the scissors, but usually because there's a weave on the fabric you can get the joint through. So there you go, so that's the first part. You've got the joint coming through the leg. On the inside of the leg it should look a bit like this. So this is the first half of the cotter pin joint. Now you need to add it to the body to secure them together. It's worth making doubly sure that you've got the leg on the right side of the body first of all. On this pattern I've got my opening in the back of the bear, and I know therefore this is the leg on this side. So again I find my tailor's tack or my little mark that I made inside the material, and holding onto the pin, just wiggle it through and it should pop through the material. There it is on the inside. So hopefully you can see that now on the inside, the pin coming through the fabric. And I'm looking at it through the opening at the back. Then you put the next disc on. And you put the washer on. And next we need to secure this pin down, and to do that we'll need a pair of pliers. With your pliers that need to have a fairly long thin nose, try and slightly separate or splay the cotter pins. Just like that, and it'll help you a little bit when you're turning them. Also I find it helps if you're holding onto the disc with this hand and pushing back the other end of the disc with your thumb, just to keep them tightly together. Then with one continuous movement you want to try and curl the back around a little bit like an earring back. Like that. And sorry, I did that in 2 movements. Then you need to turn this side. Now I always find it easier if you turn the pin rather than moving the bear. Once you're in a position you're comfortable with, turn the pin rather than the bear. And again you need to curl this one back round as well. Like this. And the aim is you want the pin here to be touching the disc, the bottom of the pin to be touching the disc here, and the bottom of the pin to be touching the disc here. and you don't want these little bits here poking out so they can stress the fabric in any way once it's completely jointed. It's best to check that your joint is tight enough at this point, as it's much harder to do once much harder to rectify once you've stuffed your bear. And to do this, a handy little way to do it is if you press the bottom disc and the top disc together, you end up with a gap like you've got here. There's a big gap underneath here. That means you'll have quite a loose joint. So you want to tighten it at this point. So just curl it around a bit further. So as you can see now, that's completely touching the disc. If I turn the joint rather than turning the bear, I can see this one's just a little bit, tiny bit loose. So again, I'll turn it down a bit, just so it's really snug. Some people prefer to put the first part of the cotter pin joint in, stuff the limb, ladder stitch up the back, so you have a complete sealed unit before then attaching it to the body and putting on the second part of the cotter pin joint. It's a matter of taste, really. Before you attach the head, you will need to have stuffed the head and built up the face. And the first thing you do is you put your washer onto your cotter pin, then the hardboard disc onto the cotter pin as well. So that's ready to be inserted in here. Then you need to thread your needle with some extra strong thread, quite a long piece if you can, and you're going to do a running stitch all the way around the base of the neck here. When you put your first stitch in, make sure you've got a long tail hanging and don't secure that thread. So you just stitch all the way round. When you've done a running stitch all the way around the base, snip off another long tail of thread and then do the first part of a knot. And pull very gently, and it should just start to draw in together, to start gathering the base of the neck. When it's gathered a little bit, put your first part of your cotter pin joint securely inside there, and now start to pull more so it completely closes around the cotter pin joint. And this is why you need extra strong thread, because you need to be pulling quite hard on this. When you've got it fairly firmly around there, tie the second part of a knot, and you'll probably still find you've got some showing here, so thread these ends onto a needle and do lots of little stitches around here just to gather it in really tightly to make it sure it's completely secure. Although once the cotter pin joint is curled, it won't come undone. This is one part where this here can sometimes get pulled out from the head, so you really need to have that material in tight, tight, tight. Once you're certain that the cotter pin joint is in securely and you can pull it and it's not going to come out, you need to insert the head onto the top of the body. It'll vary from pattern to pattern where the head goes, but on this pattern there are two darts at the top of the body, and that's where you insert the pin, so in between the two darts on the seam. So again, you get your pin, find the location where you want it to be inserted, and with one hand inside the bear, through the back there, wiggle the cotter pin joint through the fabric at the chosen point. Often at a seam it'll pop through quite easily. There you go, so there it is on the inside of the fabric. Then, just as the other joints, you get your disc and insert it onto the cotter pin. push it down, and your washer on top. Then if you can, try and splay the cotter pins slightly. I find it easier with the longer pin facing away from me. There we go. So it's just slightly splayed, and then you curl them. Halfway, and then go right round so it's touching the disc. Again, turn the pin rather than the bear so that's facing away from you, and push down on this disc and your thumb underneath, so you're giving a bit of pressure here. Go halfway and then all the way round again. And I'll just check by pushing down. Yeah, I can still curl a little bit because there's a bit of a gap there. Right, turn inside out. And there you have one little smiling bear. Then you attach the arms in exactly the same way as you did with their legs and their head. So here's the bear with all his limbs and head attached, and if you haven't done so already, you'll need to stuff the limbs. These three I stuffed beforehand. I find it easier doing it that way, but some people prefer to do it afterwards, and so here's this one here which I'll now stuff, and of course then stuff the body cavity, and then you'll ladder stitch up the back here. And there you have the finished jointed bear. For more details, have a look on our website.